So there's this article that has been being sent to me for a while, titled "The Wheel of Time Sucks." And I just kind of have been writing it off as clickbait trash that people are sending me because they just, they think I'll want to respond. And then finally it got sent to me again today, and I decided, fine, I'll give it a look. What's this person saying? Why do they think The Wheel of Time sucks? I do want to say, there are problems with The Wheel of Time. It has flaws. It's not for everybody. Trust me, I'm very aware of them. And if you don't like it, that's great. But I feel the need to respond to this article, and I apologize for not responding sooner, or actually taking the people who are telling me, no, you need to read this more seriously, because he just flat out lies about Robert Jordan and basically does a character assassination at one point, insinuating some very not okay things, saying Robert Jordan was for sure trying to do this, which I think is really gross. And Garrett Robinson, I think you should at least apologize for that. Getting into just the beginning of your article, we'll eventually get to the thing that I find extremely offensive, and I think you should apologize for, but we'll get to that in a minute. Basically, it starts off with him saying, someone on his Tumblr said, I've been wanting to start The Wheel of Time, but you said something negative about it. I heard it has really great female characters. Should I get into it? And then his article starts as a response to that. I've heard this before, the wonderful, fleshed out, complex female characters part. And I have ... I have doubts. My answer turned into a post basically saying this post was too big for Tumblr. I don't know how Tumblr works, if that's true or not. But he then has this medium-sized medium post, but comedy. He then breaks down his 6 reasons why he doesn't like The Wheel of Time into factors. So first factor, I have never heard a woman say this about the female characters of The Wheel of Time. I do not mean by this that no women enjoy The Wheel of Time. I am sure many do. I'm sure some of them will jump on here and tell me they agree that there are wonderful, fleshed out female characters. That is fine. The only thing I mean by this statement is that I have never personally been told by a woman that they enjoy the female characters in Wheel of Time. And I usually hear the exact opposite of that. I can tell you I've been to JordanCon. It's the most female representative convention I have been to with the highest percentage women, period. Oh my God, that stood out to me quite a bit. And as someone who has had a somewhat Wheel of Time centered channel for years now, I can tell you there's a lot of women out there who do agree that it is incredibly well fleshed out female characters, but you're going to get more into why the female characters aren't great later on, so I will hold back on my counterpoints until then. But let's move on to your second point. There's also this GIF. Okay, he puts a lot of GIFs in here. Second factor, I gave up on the Wheel of Time series in the middle of book 5, 6, somewhere around there. So it's entirely possible that later books have excellent female characters. I have been told by several fans that I gave up too early, and it gets really good later on and ends super well. I still have my doubts. That's not a factor though. That's you saying you gave up, which I do respect the fact that you are willing to admit you didn't finish it. There are a lot of people who would write this article who hadn't finished it and would claim they did. Thank you for not lying. But you do lie later on, so that I'm going to take away that point from you. Third factor, and this is where it gets really, really offensive. I have a long vendetta against Robert Jordan that is partially tied to his writing, but partially not. I was reading Wheel of Time, and at some point, I realized what he is doing. Now, this is a definitive statement. This is what Robert Jordan is doing. He was opening up storyline after storyline and closing no loops. And I said to myself, holy shit. He plans to write this series until he dies, and then it will be the great unfinished work of Robert Jordan. And that's how he wants to leave this life. And that is exactly what the did, and not in a Stan Lee sort of way where he knew the world would go on beyond his life. He wanted to be the only one in control of the series and to never finish it. And I think that's a move, and I've always been annoyed with him for this. And I guess it's cool because it gave us Brandon Sanderson, but we could have had Sanderson regardless. And then I wouldn't have endless Jordan fanboys jizzing his praise every time I criticize him, which is whenever he's brought up. Okay, I appreciate people giving their opinions, no matter what. That's fine. But when you're someone who, I guess Garrett Robinson, has influence and people listen to, you have a responsibility to do research before you make accusations, especially character assassinating accusations like this, calling Robert Jordan a and his fanboys jizzing their pants as they praise him, or whatever you said. First of all, Robert Jordan had basically the entire story outlined. He even had the ending written. The ending we get in the book is a Robert Jordan written ending. Saying he didn't know how he was going to finish his series is a flat out lie. On top of that, claiming it was his plan all along, Robert Jordan died pretty young and rather unexpectedly from a diagnosed heart disease. He wasn't going out at 80 having planned to never finish his series. He was taken early and was desperately trying to finish his series. This kind of thing to say without doing your research is really gross, because you're doing it in a very public medium where a lot of people are going to read it and not fact check you and just go with that as their default opinion. And you need to apologize and redact that. And the base of this argument that he closed no storylines or loops is just not true, because there are storylines that begin and end well before book 5 and 6, or wherever you happen to finish. So that in your premise is just wrong on its own. But you're going to prove later on you're not a very observant reader. So I'm going to go ahead and just say you probably just weren't paying attention. Fourth factor. Robert Jordan was hopelessly derivative. Basically, he says here that Robert Jordan was just stealing from Tolkien, and Nazgul and Myrddraal are the exact same thing. And here, I'll just read exactly what he put. Except like the worst kind of fanboy, Jordan goes, "No, mine are different because their cloaks don't move. And also, they're not wraiths bound to a ring. And also, there's a lot more of them and they're like better." Not the vibe Myrddraal give at all. First of all, Robert Jordan publicly and openly many times has said the Wheel of Time at the beginning is essentially his take, his retelling of Lord of the Rings in a more realistic human world. So yes, he acknowledges and knows he's pulling heavily from Nazgul, as did almost all of fantasy from the 40s to the 80s, 90s, and hell, still even now. Everyone pulls from Tolkien. I'd say Jordan put enough spins on it, the ones you list here and try to do like offhandedly, than most. He did it better. He put a lot more there. A lot of people do just have the wraiths bound to the MacGuffin, and that's the thing. It's just, this is wrong. Like, this is a fantasy fan. You should understand and know fantasy better. Because up until and a bit after the Wheel of Time, and still arguably today, a lot of fantasy is just retelling different aspects of Tolkien, and it's something Jordan did as well, wanting to put his own take on a story he loved. I don't think you should be talking about fantasy altogether if you misunderstand such a core fundamental aspect of the evolution of fantasy for such a long period of time. I mean, this is just, at this point, seems like petty. Like, there's going to be people in the comment section saying Daniel's defending this so hard because he's just a Wheel of Time fanboy. And you're not entirely wrong. I also just find flat out lying and misunderstanding fantasy to be rather annoying from someone who, I guess, or it seems, has some form of a following online. And he ends this by saying, but that's because they're Nazgul. You just listed a bunch of reasons of how they're a little bit different. Like, I don't understand how someone who's claiming to be so knowledgeable in fantasy can miss such a huge, important part of the evolution of fantasy and at least not take the time to look up what Jordan, his core philosophy was for beginning the Wheel of Time. Because at the end of every book, there's an interview in the audiobook where he specifically says, like, yeah, I wanted to go with that kind of story and then do a very different telling of how I think it would go. So there are huge elements that are Tolkien-esque. That's the point. Same thing with a bajillion other fantasy series I'm sure you would defend and praise. This just seems petty. Fifth factor. Despite the entire previous entry about being so derivative of Tolkien and others, Jordan manages to miss out on what actually makes fantasy awesome and worth reading. He didn't tell a story about hobbit-like creatures, ordinary people, and extraordinary circumstances. He told a story about a character like Aragorn. Except if Aragorn was also a more powerful wizard than Gandalf, and if on Aragorn's journey he fell in love with and got to bone Arwen, Éowyn, and Galadriel, and all three of them were hopelessly devoted to him and would bone him anytime he wanted, but were ridiculously catty and towards each other because of their jealousy of having to share what must have been the most epic penis in the history of Middle-earth. Okay, this is just completely misrepresenting the relationship there. Spoiler warning for the Wheel of Time. I gotta put that in there. Min, Avienda, and Elaine don't catty each other. They aren't towards each other pretty much at all. In fact, they're very level-headed and talk openly about the fact they all love this guy. And there's, of course, like minor moments where they think like, oh, I'm a bit jealous. But the progressive thing is there, Robert Jordan gave them enough character, personality, and agency that they believably move beyond that, and they realize that they love these people all together, and that's okay. And saying, again, you just have a factually wrong thing here, that Rand bones whoever he wants, whenever he wants, is just not right. There's even a scene later in the series, which you didn't get to, where the women sit him down and say, we're going to control who you see and when. You have no agency in this relationship, and we're going to decide that. Because we all love you, but we're not going to let you become a point of contention between our friendship. So you just completely miscategorize that and are wrong. Again. Rand is the biggest Mary Sue I've ever heard of, and his only flaw is that he sometimes goes a little crazy because he's just too powerful for his own good. Nope. Mary Sues don't fail. Rand's entire story is him failing. He fails to save people. He accidentally destroys his own armies. Rand is a gigantic failure, repeatedly. That's the point of his arc. Rand is not a Mary Sue by definition at that point. He's also just wrong and bad at things several times. So, no. But maybe we're supposed to pay attention to Rand's best friends, Matt and Perrin. They're the ordinary side characters, right? Except when they become gods in their own right. My memory's a little hazy. Jesus, dude, you're not even pretending you did some research before making this post. But basically, Matt becomes so lucky that he literally can't lose battles. That's not why Matt wins battles. His luck is partially contributing, I guess, a bit, but he is a character of sacrifice. That's the entire purpose of his character. Matt sacrifices. It's how he loses an eye. It's how he does all kinds of things that are damaging to him. He is a character who pays prices, and he gets the memories of all previous great captains by sacrificing his own memories. He has massive gaps in his own life, and he has them filled in from other generals. That's the point of that. And you're just, again, miscategorizing here. And Perrin, with no powers whatsoever, what the do you think a wolf brother is, man? Did you just not pay attention at all? Become such a mighty warrior from blacksmithing really hard, that's not how he gets stronger. That he crushes the heads of 3 Myrddraal, the Nazgul analogs who were so powerful they spent the entire first book fleeing from just one of them in a single swipe of his hammer. There's so much wrong in that sentence, I'm having a hard time keeping it all straight. That's not where Perrin gets his powers from. He's a wolf brother, which means he communicates and has wolf powers. They don't just flee from one Myrddraal. Do you think one Myrddraal was responsible for Winter's Night? Do you forget about the Drakkar and Trollocs? They were being pursued by an army. Oh my god! Also, let's not forget that Perrin gets a perfect girlfriend who comes out of nowhere so hard, even 19-year-old me was like, whoa, wait. Why would this girl even be interested in such a goddamn dweeb? Yes, because the blacksmith you just described who's able to crush skulls is a dweeb, and calling Fael the perfect girlfriend, oh my god. Also, he meets Fael at an inn, the equivalent of a bar. Have you never met someone in a bar? I have. That's how that happens. Do you not have social interactions, man? I've dated people I've met in a bar. Power creep, thy name is Wheel of Time. No? Sixth factor, you know the ridiculous fantasy tropes where the genre gets made fun of? Okay, this is his dumbest point, arguably, yet. He literally just uses Gandalf, Frodo, Bilbo, Aragorn as examples of nice, concise fantasy names. And then he goes to one of the most extreme names in the Wheel of Time, Nynaeve, and compares it as a very unreasonably long and complicated name. Except he uses Nynaeve's full name, El Nynaeve Til Almira Mandragoran, it's long. I think I just said it slightly wrong. But he's forgetting to compare it to the full names from Lord of the Rings. Do you know what a full name is? Or did you just look up Nynaeve and then go, oh, that was her name the whole time. I was saying it wrong. And Aragorn's his full name. You're just literally pulling the most extreme example and comparing to the most simple example to try and prove your point. You know the whole thing about the Chosen One prophecy? Yeah, that's not Lord of the Rings thing either. There is a Chosen One prophecy in Lord of the Rings. There is a passing mention of some ancient verse. Okay, you mentioned right there is one. And there's no prophecy for Frodo at all. Yeah, it's for Aragorn. The closest thing we get is Gandalf saying, fuck it, dude, I don't know, he's what, okay, no, that's not, you're just making up there. Meanwhile, in the Wheel of Time, holy does it ever get tiring hearing about how Rand is the one prophesied blah, 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 blah. Basically saying he doesn't like how much the prophecies are brought up. Everyone knows Rand is the chosen one. It becomes his driving force, his primary motivation, in a way it never did even for Harry Potter. Oh, okay, again, just a blatant, this is not a criticism thing, because I find it to be a pretty big flaw in Harry Potter and in Lord of the Rings that prophecies are not talked about more. In the real world, if we had a magical prophecy where it was this dude is gonna save the world, I would talk about it over dinner. I would talk about that a lot. I would bring it up. I would be like, hey, you should probably do this because you're the chosen one. And I think it's kind of important that you do it. Like, that's just how humans behave. And it goes back to Robert Jordan's core philosophy for The Wheel of Time, that it's Tolkien told from a more human, believable perspective, more grounded. I don't get what you're not getting. Maybe that's why every woman in the world is so eager to bone him. No, they're not. I think there's 2 women who want to have sex with Rand at some point in the series because he's the chosen one. And he turns them down both times. And that's very believable. There are people in this world who are attracted to power, and they will make moves on people who are in power. That is a realistic thing that happens. It's called celebrity. Like, there's a reason people want to have sex with Leonardo DiCaprio. It's because he's the most well-known, popular guy. That's just a real world thing, and it's men and women. I know guys, I've met people who say, like, I'm more attracted to celebrities because they're celebrities. I'm more attracted to people in power because they're people in power. 7th factor, again, which is actually the 6th, because one of your factors for not liking it was you putting it down. Doesn't make sense. The moment you've been waiting for. So about these women, you've probably caught hints of it in the post so far, but no. The women of the Wheel of Time are not complex and awesome. Let's just go ahead and break that down real quick. Nynaeve is the most powerful channeler who's not a chosen one type on that level or someone from a previous age, is absolutely a complex, badass female character with a crap ton of agency, to the point where she's the one who sends her love interest off fulfilling his own prophecy. She makes the decisions. Her motivations, super complex. She starts as this maternal figure who wants to protect those that she grew up with and moves on beyond that, embracing this wider calling of healing and pushing the understanding of what the One Power can do so far beyond that while staying true to her wisdom roots. Incredible evolution, very complex character, overcoming her own anger issues, her own blocks, tons of stuff there. Let's see how he just boils down the level of development we get with characters like Nynaeve. I mean, from the very simple perspective of the Bechdel, okay, say it with me. The Bechdel test is not a good wokeness test because it only takes 3 things into account. Are there more than 2 named female characters? Do they talk to each other? And is it not about boys? If that is the perspective you set yourself for a woke, like, progressive work, that's pathetic because it doesn't take into account agency, it doesn't take into account motivation of any kind or character or personality. It's terrible. The Bechdel test is not enough, and we need more from our creators out there than just passing these 3 points. I would be incredibly surprised to find a single conversation in the 5 or 6 books I read that passes. It means the Bechdel test. Reread them because they have huge storylines and plot lines on their own where they don't really mention their love interests much. I mean, do you want people not mentioning their love interests at all? If mentioning a love interest, even in like casual conversation with your friend, makes you sexist? I literally early this morning was talking to one of my friends about my girlfriend, Maddie. So I guess I need to tell Maddie that I'm a sexist piece of garbage who just views her as an object. Damn. And that includes the book I gave up on, which had hundreds of pages of 3 female main characters off on the road adventure with no male main characters around. Why are you acting like that's a negative? They have their own plot, they're off doing their own thing, own agency. Like, what the hell? That's not even a criticism. You just condescendingly put adventure in quotes. Virtually every woman character I met in the series was absolutely obsessed with having sex with boys. Please show me where Moraine does that. Please show me where Elida does that. And no, like even Elaine, Min, and Avienda, like they all have their own things. I guess you could kind of say it for men. Across the board, they usually wanted to bone Rand. Nope. Where does Nynaeve want to bone Rand? Where does Egwene want to bone Rand? She actually is like, no, I'm done with you, and kind of just moves on. Like, no, there's 3 characters who want to bone Rand. That's it. The one character who seemed to avoid this trope was Moraine, but even she eventually ran into a man who she quickly became preoccupied with, and I began to roll my eyes every time she's upset that Moraine is attracted to a man at one point. Are you not attracted to people ever? Do you not think anyone can be attracted to someone without it meaning like it's sexist garbage? All right, that's a weird world to live in, my dude. And then he moves on to talk about LGBTQ plus representation, which I agree with. It's not the best, but that's because it was written in a time where, that would have gotten Robert Jordan a lot of backlash. And I don't think, we can necessarily hold it against the Wheel of Time, though, yes, I do wish there was more in there. Final word on the matter. The Women of the Wheel of Time series are why I gave up on the series in the first place. I was in the middle of whichever book I was on, 5 or 6, that 3 main female characters were off on their own little adventure together, far away from the main plot. And the 3 of them would not stop at each other and being the most pointlessly catty, useless trope stock characters. They had legitimate grievances with each other and were in like a legitimate power struggle, something that like people do in real life all the time. Try to figure out like who's the alpha of the group, who's going to really be in charge here. And there are male characters that go through the same thing in the Wheel of Time. I wonder if you discount their grievances with each other as and catty, because your language here is pretty sexist. Basically, you're dismissing legitimate female character-driven growth that leads to conflict as pointless and It was like reading about a man's man interpretation of what Mean Girls must have been like if he'd only ever heard of the movie's title. I'm just gonna disagree. It was just the straw that broke the camel's back for me. I wasn't even social justice woke back then. I don't think you still are now. Your standard's the Bechdel test if you dismiss female conflict as bitchy. It was just the most pointless page after page storyline. Everyone's in my life, blah, 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 blah. I opted out of the game. It made me sad. The first book, Eye of the World, was legit one of my favorite fantasy books ever. Weird. You like the one that only followed the male perspective so much more. And even if the series has one of the best endings ever, it's not worth it for me to suffer through 3 more 1,000-page door stoppers to get there. I'll go through one mediocre book in a series, like the middle book of the Mistborn trilogy. I won't suffer through multiple books that are as long as multiple regular books. Okay, so you try to character assassinate Robert Jordan by lying about his motivations as an author and saying he's trying to exploit his fans by dragging it out and just leave this legacy that is just blatantly not true. You horrendously misrepresent his female representation, which if you do ignore their agency, their personality, their growth as characters, and just purely distill it down to when they're talking about their significant others, and maybe that's only when you pay attention, I guess you could have the interpretation you do. It's absolutely okay to not like Wheel of Time. There are so many valid criticisms you could have, and I don't think that it's objective that all the females are represented great. They're just not as bad as he tries to paint them here. I'm just amazed to see this level of misinterpretation out there, because wowee. And of course, I'd like to record a special shout out to my latest high tier Patreons, Shannon Quinn and Warflblarg. Wait for that one to show up at the end. I think I said it kind of right, but thank you guys so much for supporting the channel, and you might not see your names on the next couple of videos due to me having them uploaded days ago in advance for not being able to record this weekend.